program, as we say, people who involve themselves in religious studies and in vocational training. So these things have been the underpinnings of the lack of recidivating, you see. So now we found with the Muslims that the numbers of recidivism are very low in terms of the people who continue to practice their deen once they're out. But if they don't, they're in the same category as everybody else, the same type of rate, the same rate.
And what is the ability for a Muslim to practice his religion in the prison? I mean, what accommodations are made for them in terms of praying, in terms of food?
It varies a lot, but in every case you will see that that there's no that they are allowed to pray. You see, different levels of accommodation you will find in different places. In the federal system, a lot of times it's more accommodating than in some of the state and local jails. But in every case, there's some accommodation. There are very few times you'll find that they will say you can't pray. You see, but to what extent is that prayer accommodated? You will not always find Jumu'ah prayer, for example, in organized fashion. You know, it should be, but in some cases it's not, and you really have to push for that. And that's a whole dynamic that sometimes you are successful and sometimes you're not. But the diet in the federal system, there's a special diet for religious purposes. You know, you have kosher and halal, basically. And then you have a no meat option for vegans and vegetarians. So that is accommodated. The Eid, the Jumu'ah, Ramadan, everything is accommodated in the federal system where I am. And Tariq is works with the state a lot, and Imam Ismail works with all of them really, but he has a lot of contact with the local county and city jails too, so they can address that a lot better than I can.
And what's the dynamic of Islamic education in the prison? I mean, do people are really taking time to study Islam in the prison? And you find that a lot of people in the prison really use the time to get good knowledge about Islam.
Yes. Matter of fact, it's to the point now where a lot of people who are coming into the prison as volunteer imams, chaplains, are not at the level where many of the inmates are. You see, so the inmates are very diligent, in studying, and they commit themselves to that too. The level, I've been very impressed with the level of progress with the guys, especially in the federal system. Very impressed. Very impressed.
And I guess that same rule applies, that if they continue that, when they get out, they'll be successful. But do you find some people who are diligent in the prison, but when they get outside?
Yes. I've seen guys who were imams in the prison, and I was embarrassed that, you know, they were so much more knowledgeable and seemed to be much more pious than I. And then when they got out, they never come to the masjid. They would never come, not even the first time. They'd be in the clubs and, you know, in other places where they shouldn't be. So, yeah, you have that.
And then when they come back, they switch back to the imam mode, huh?
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens.
But let me ask you, there was some, I mean,
it's not as much, it's not as widespread now as it was before, though. I don't see it as much now as I used to.
And we see some controversy about Islam in the prisons. Some articles, like in Newsweek and Time magazine, saying about the spread of Wahhabi Islam in the prison, you know? Is that the case, or is it just the spread of the religion of Islam in the prisons?
I have to say I have, I don't know if it's denial or just a block, but when you talk about Wahhabi Islam and Salafism, those to me are pejorative terms, and I really don't relate to them very well because what they mean varies so much from place to place. So it's hard for me to pinpoint enough to actually address, you know, what is Wahhabism or Salafism.
Well, if, you know, if we break it down a little bit more, they say that the version of Islam being propagated in the prisons is a negative form of Islam.
Well, in today's world and in our present political reality, it's all negative. So, you know, pick your negative because it's seen in a negative light, it's projected in a negative light. You know, that's the way Islam is being painted today, as a negative. You see, but I disagree with that, of course. Of course, I disagree with that. In the federal system, you have just the full-time people, you have 14 imams. And nobody is promoting Wahhabism or, you know, that type of thing in the federal system. As I said, Tariq and Ismail can address, you know, those other levels of incarceration, the state and the local. But what you would have is that amongst the inmates themselves, depending on who is in the population, a certain type of Islam, approach to Islam may be pushed amongst those guys. So if you have people there who are from, you know, say the Sham area, Palestine, Jordan, around in there, their flavor may be a lot more political, that type of thing. Right. Imam Muhammad, if he has a lot of his people there, it may be more civic, you see. If there are a lot of people who are more orthodox, or if they are from the Salafi community, for example, it may be a lot more legalistic, you see. So it just depends on who is on the compound, and if there's a person who is in the population, and if there's a person as a full-time staff, or a person who comes in periodically as a volunteer or contract chaplain, you know, how that is guided and tempered. You see.
When you meet Muslims in the prison, do you ever meet any Muslims who, had they not been Muslim, in the same situation wouldn't have been there?
I mean, once it's happened, it was destined to happen.
Right. Right.
But I have met people who had very heavily, whose cases were very heavily, had heavy political overtones and religious overtones to them. And
but people
it seems apparent that because they're Muslim, they were treated differently.
I mean, but from their own behavior, I mean, they weren't criminals. They weren't people who ever committed any criminal acts.
At all, my goodness.
So they were there for a reason other than that.
It would appear so.
Okay, even though we don't know what it is, but it wasn't because.
It definitely appeared that their Islam had a lot to do with the outcome of the case.
All right. Well, Brother Mateen, I appreciate you sitting with me and spending some time with us. And as you're one of our elder brothers in Islam, who, alhamdulillah, Allah blessed to be able to go to Medina and study Islam in Saudi Arabia near the two holy mosques. I want to ask you, as being a Muslim in this country for quite some time now, what do you feel is the outlook for the future of Islam here in America?
I think it's a good outlook. We are in the age of the millennials, the I generation. And they have so much that is immediately available to them that man, they can just accomplish so much more. And I've recently traveled to Houston and to California as well. And our recent family and marriage counseling seminar brought a lot of people in from different places too. And I'm very encouraged by what I see from the young people. Very encouraged. Very encouraged.
So you feel we have an optimistic outlook?
Oh yeah, definitely, no doubt, man.
Alhamdulillah.
No doubt.
Alhamdulillah. Brother Mateen, thank you very much for your time.
I hope we've been able to separate the fact from the fiction, the truth from the falsehood, and the myths from the reality, and leave you with a positive understanding about Islam and Muslims. And I invite you to join us as we continue to travel throughout the world of Islam, keeping it real by telling the stories which must be told. And I ask you all to remember the very important rule: don't judge Islam by the people, but judge the people by Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله